Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a former controls geek turned actuator geek, currently heading up our business development for new digital products in the Belimo Americas region. I'd like to spend about 20 minutes today talking about new digital developments in the HVAC controls world, and also some key products that Belimo has today that'll help you build, help you plan, and help you specify commercial HVAC products that leverage smart and connected products. So when I use the term connected device, what I mean is a device that supports a digital communication path to another device so they can talk to each other. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same type of device. It could be a different type of device from a different manufacturer. But the key is it's a language, a digital language that they're talking to one another. And the other term, as far as a smart device goes, is basically that same connected device. It has the same communication bus to talk to other devices, but it adds some capabilities. First, it will have the ability to sense things, so have sensors attached to it so it can measure the environment, whether that's temperature, humidity, light levels, whatever. It's a smart device. And then logic to act upon that. And because it generates data, the ability to store the data and provide that data via communication. So to get things started, I'd like to give you the obligatory overview on how the world is becoming more digital. So by 2025, it's predicted that we'll have about 6.5 billion people that are connected. And when I say connected, I mean a person that regularly uses the internet to communicate with another person. That's about 80% of the world's population in 2025. We'll also have about 75 billion connected devices. Most of these will be cell phones, computers, cars, appliances, things that are starting to be connected or today, but we'll also see an influx of new products like wearable sensors and environmental control devices that all kind of work together to enhance how we experience the world. And all of this represents about a $3 trillion global market to build out, to support and service this connected world. Now, the HVAC controls world that we all live in is fairly slow to develop and change, but we're not immune to this digital transformation. So if you plan to work in this field for at least another 5 years or so, you're going to see a significant impact on the various products and processes that go into building the environment for a building today. So Belimo's been at the forefront of innovation in our unique space since we were founded in 1975. Our first product was a direct coupled actuator, which allowed you to directly mount the actuator on a damper shaft. Everyone else required linkages at the time, and this was an elegant solution, and it kind of defined the future of the entire damper actuator industry. So from that point on, we've been market leaders. We entered the America's market in 1989, and fairly soon after that, we realized that in order to have the most reliable and efficient and cost-effective product available, we needed to change our motor technology. So we started implementing what's called a brushless DC motor. It's more efficient, it's more reliable, but it's not a drop-in replacement. It takes typically a microprocessor to control and monitor that motor. And in order to be cost-effective, we realized we couldn't include a microprocessor in every single actuator we make. And this was the advent of really when we entered the software industry. So we created this product using what's called an ASIC. And an ASIC is kind of has a similar task as a microprocessor, but it's single purpose. So it's a circuit designed to control a motor in this case. It's kind of like printing a book as opposed to having a tablet or an e-reader that you load information onto. That would be more like a microprocessor. So it's really expensive to design, but if you make millions of these products a year, it's really inexpensive to manufacture. It protects our intellectual property on how we control motors, and it comes with a very important part of our whole business today, which is MPBus. MPBus is a communication standard that's built into that ASIC. It allows our manufacturing processes, when an actuator rolls across the assembly line, it can actually tell the actuator what its personality is, how it's supposed to be configured, how it's supposed to run. And the reason I bring this all up is because this ASIC, we're really the first smarts in communication that we put inside of an actuator, and it's really the basis for everything we build today. So with that out of the way, let's look at a really basic HVAC application. So on the left, you have a little DDC controller. It has an output to control a valve actuator on a cooling coil, and we also have an input on that same controller to monitor the temperature on the leaving side of that fan unit. That control process is the controller is looking at the temperature, comparing it to a set point, likely like 55 degrees for cooling. And if it needs more cooling, it opens the valve a little bit more. If it needs less cooling, it closes the valve a little bit more. So that's a very simple process. And if you zoom out and look at an entire air handler, you can imagine that while there's that one simple process, it's happening all over that air handler. You have multiple valves, multiple damper actuators. You have fans that have speed control on them. And those are all fairly simple processes, but they all have to work together. And there's a digital controller that's connected to every single one of these inputs, and then is also providing an output signal to all of those valves and dampers and fans. Here's what the wiring kind of looks like. So on the left, you have a programmable controller, and then you have analog signals, basically a 2 to 10 volt signal or a 0 to 10 volt signal, connecting individually to each of the actuators. If there's VFDs on the project or on the air handler, to telling the fans what speed to run at. You have connections for passive sensors to sense temperatures, and then active sensors which produce a voltage or a current to represent things like humidity and pressure. So lots of home runs between this digital controller to connect to outputs and to connect to inputs. So the first product I want to talk to you about, and then we'll talk about how this kind of applies to that example, is our Dash Mod line of actuators. These are actuators that look and feel just like a standard actuator, like an SR if you're familiar with our product line, but they also include a 2-wire connection for communications, and that can be configured as either BACnet MSTP or Modbus RTU. So once you give each of these actuators an address, your DDC system can now talk to the actuators instead of using analog signals. The actuators also have the ability to hook sensors up to them. So one input on each of these actuators allows you to hook up a passive sensor, an active sensor, maybe a pressure or humidity, or a dry contact closure, which could be a freestat or something like that. And then we also always appreciate when you use the orange sensors to connect to them as well. But each one of those actuators allows one sensor. So once you have these hooked up and communicating, you can now, from your DDC system, send a command to the actuator to tell it what position to go to, just like you'd do with a 2 to 10 volt signal. But then you also, basically for free, get feedback. Where's the actuator at? What's the value of the sensor that's attached to it? And then you also get indication of the actuator health, whether it's working well or not, if it's hit its torque limit, stroke times, things like that. This product is available today. Here's a quick look at the top of the cut sheet. If you want to see more about this particular actuator, just search for the Dash Mod on the Belimo US website, and you'll get a list of all the different damper actuator types that we have that support BACnet and Modbus. So here's that same chilled water valve control application again, where where the digital controller is monitoring temperature with a passive signal, and then it's using a 2 to 10 volts output to modulate that chilled water coil. So now imagine we use a mod actuator. So instead of having to use an output to connect to the actuator and using an input to read this sensor, we can now hook the sensor up to the actuator and then use communication to command the actuator and to get the sensor value. And while that might not look like a big change on an individual basis per device, if you remember this previous diagram, you have a lot of home run signals. You have a lot of paths between this digital controller and each of the devices, whether they're sensors or actuators or VFDs. But now if you start looking at leveraging these type of communicating actuators instead of analog actuators, and you look at the whole system, it starts to make a little more sense. Now you just run a bus connecting all of your devices together. Sensors can be connected to local devices like the actuators instead of home runs back to the digital controller. And where it makes sense, you can use communicating sensors. So we have a line of sensors that talk on Modbus and BACnet as well, instead of just actuators. And most VFDs today include BACnet MSTP communication. So basically you can do an entire air handler using bus devices. So I mentioned communicating sensors. So we have a line of duct and outside air sensors that have BACnet MSTP or Modbus communication. On the actuators, the dash mod actuators, it's software selectable. So basically you plug a handheld into the actuator, you can address it, you can change the protocol, you can change the speed, things like that. With the sensors, they are one or the other. Dash 5.5 is BACnet and dash 5.6 is Modbus, and then you use dip switches to actually configure the addressing and speeds and things like that. Excuse me. These are a unique product in that not only can you get a sensor that has temperature, relative humidity, CO2 in the same package, and then get all that information over this 2-wire bus, BACnet or Modbus, you can also get calculated values out of these sensors. So they'll calculate for you absolute humidity, enthalpy, and dew point based upon the temperature and relative humidity. So you get all 6 of those properties all over that 2-wire bus. Again, here's a data sheet on what that product looks like. If you want to see BACnet products, just look for a dash 5.6 in the search term and on our Belimo website, and a dash 5 for Modbus. And moving to the next product, we have a dash IP line of actuators that we've had for about a year now. Those are similar to the mod actuators in that they support both BACnet or Modbus. It's selectable, but they're the IP or Ethernet variants of both of those protocols. So instead of a 2-wire RS-485 network in your building, you leverage the IP network. And the IP actuators also support an additional sensor. So instead of just one sensor, you can hook up 2. But you have the same capability of sending a signal to the actuator via that bus technology, getting feedback back, getting sensor values back. And then we have one added functionality, is that this actuator includes a cloud client in it. So basically the actuator, if you give it access to the internet, will go out and talk to the Belimo cloud, and it'll push data logs there. So if you have some sensors you have connected that you like to see tracked and you want to connect to the cloud, you can do that. There's also the ability to configure and or control the actuator via the cloud. So in a certain unique application, maybe you want to use a cloud application to control an actuator. This product will let you do that. If you have any questions about cloud applications, I'll cover a little bit of that in the future, but just reach out to our technical support group and they'll connect you with our cloud support people. Here's a quick data sheet on the IP actuators. We cover most of the actuator range as far as motor types with these. There's example of the AF. It looks and feels just like an AF actuator, but you'll see it has an Ethernet port on the side as opposed to just a standard cable plug. And then we do offer an additional type of setup on these actuators. Instead of connecting two sensors, if you want to control the actuator in a traditional way, using like a 2 to 10 volt signal coming out of your DDC panel to tell it what position to go to, you can do that. You configure one of the sensors as a set point, a position set point input, and then you can use the other one as a process value, like a temperature or humidity or whatever you want to monitor. And you can still see that all via the cloud, and you can actually override how the actuator is working from the cloud. That's called hybrid mode. So we have a number of, I've touched on some of them. We have a number of Belimo devices with BACnet communication built into them. From a features and benefit standpoint, in some instances, there's a significant labor savings that you could enjoy, particularly on something like a built-up air handler, where you have a lot of devices and a lot of conduit. And running a bus around an air handler, the package of an air handler, is much more efficient than a lot of home runs. We live in a world where data is important, so the more data you can get, instead of just telling an actuator what to do with a voltage signal, if you can get a local sensor, if you can see status of the actuator, feedback of the actuator, all that is beneficial. In some cases, maybe you're out of I/O on your building controller and you need to add something to a system. Well, you don't need I/O to use all these actuators. You can communicate with them and control them. And then this, looking to the future, it opens some doors to how do we change what a control system looks like. You don't necessarily have to have the logic for whatever application this actuator is handling in the controller that it's attached to. The logic could remain there, or maybe the logic could be in a building controller that talks over BACnet to these devices, and then it opens the door for cloud integration. So I want to touch on the smart device portion, just briefly, but we use this term, we call things performance devices, and I want to touch on what a performance device is. So again, we'll look at that chilled water modulation example for a fan. Again, this programmable controller is monitoring the discharge temperature, comparing it to a set point, and then modulating the chilled water valve open and close. So a performance device allows additional information at the actuator to impact that process. So for those of you familiar with an energy valve, this is kind of like an energy valve example, except we're just looking at temperature. So we can make this heat transfer process smarter if we know incoming and outgoing water temperature, so we know the delta T across the coil. And if we set a limit, we could tell the actuator to start backing off when our delta T got below a certain point. From a perspective of this controller, it's the same, right? It's still the same PID loop looking at the same temperature and set point, trying to maintain temperature. But we've added some sensing and some logic in that device to make the process work better, to make the process smarter. And then it's logical that we want to communicate with this actuator, because now it has some data associated with it. It has some information. It has these supply and return water temperatures, which are good for diagnostics. And it's just good data. So you want to be able to suck that out, and therefore we add communication. So that's a performance device. The poster child we have for performance devices is our energy valve product. And it does all those things. It has smarts for the delta T management. It has a flow meter for flow control. It has the 2 temperature sensors. But it is the best example of what a performance device does. Another product you may not be familiar with is our 6-way valve, but it's a 6-way EPIV. So it's an electronic pressure independent valve. It's intended to allow both hydronic heating and cooling, so a 4-pipe system to push cooling or heating water through a single coil. And instead of that just being position based, we can now allow that to be a pressure independent operation by measuring flow rate and modulating the valve to maintain the desired flow. So those are performance devices. I want to briefly touch on our cloud. We have two types of connections to our cloud. We talked about the IP actuator. It has an Ethernet port on it. You plug that in and give it access to the internet. It'll basically phone home and talk to this Belimo core cloud. Same thing with the energy valve. On the right side, we have temporary connections. So we have some products that allow you to use a smartphone and use NFC to talk directly to the actuator. And that smartphone can act as a gateway on a temporary basis so that it can allow the cloud to get data or push data into the actuators themselves. That's all done using this device API. The core cloud, which an API is basically a language, a way of talking. So all the data ends up in the core cloud. There's basically what we call a digital twin of the device that's there when the device is born or when the device is manufactured. And then we expose all of this data and connectivity to these devices through what we call our client API. And this is a published standard that we've created and we share with developers who want to build their own applications to access that data and visualize it. So here's another look at that. So if you look at the energy valve example, the energy valve connects using our device API to the core cloud, and then people can develop business applications, CBAs, that use this published protocol. And as a quick example, so you can kind of look at the data as just a jumble of information, where the CBA kind of turns that jumble of information into something that visually makes sense to the user. So again, if you have questions about our cloud and you're interested in developing solutions, please reach out to our technical support group and they will put you in touch with the right people. Some examples of those CBAs. We have a new product called the Energy Flow Map, which we're just about to release, that will take all the energy valves from a building that are cloud connected and let you overlay them on a map so you can see how they interact with one another and how much energy they're providing to various spaces. If you use the IP product, you can dabble around with a product called If This Then That. You want to see what you could do with information like weather information or different information from a building. It's kind of a recipe builder that lets you take information in and act upon that. And that product can be used to tell our IP actuators in a building what to do. I'm not going to read through this, but we have a guiding document. We call it our IOT Principles document. And it's a guideline for what we do as a company from an IoT and connected device standpoint. And it's meant for our own use. And it's also meant as an outward statement to tell our customers what our plans with IoT are. A lot of text here, but the most important thing is this first line. Belimo's business is that of a device manufacturer. Everything we do from a connectivity, from a cloud standpoint, is all geared towards maximizing the value of our devices. We want to sell more devices. We're a device manufacturer. We always have been. That's our plan for the future. If you want to see more on this, we also have some FAQs on our cloud. We have a privacy and security document, and you can also get a copy of this principles document. You can follow the link on the screen, or you can just put IoT in the search bar on the Belimo US website, and you'll be directed here. So that's what I wanted to cover today. I believe that Michaela, if you have any questions, she'll be able to facilitate those.
Thank you so much, Tom. I have a couple questions coming through. Just a friendly reminder that if you should have any questions, please type in your question. I will read that question aloud and Tom will answer them as best as possible. If for some reason we don't get to your questions during this webinar, we will reach out to you individually and provide you with an answer. Please make sure that you follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, Facebook. You can always see what's going on in the Belimo world on the various social media platforms. Okay, are you ready for the first question, Tom?
Yeah, fire away.
Okay, here we go. Can you briefly just address the security of the cloud application?
We use a SSL connection. So for those of you who are security geeks, like myself, the actuators on a periodic basis will start up an SSL connection between the actuator with the cloud client in it and connect to our cloud. Our cloud never talks down to the actuator. It waits for the actuator to start the conversation. So from a security standpoint, it's all one way. You don't have to worry about opening firewalls or having clouds connecting down into a building.
And then, of course, if you want additional information, you can pull that information from our website. Is that correct?
Exactly. We have an IoT page that has all this documentation on it. So again, just search IoT on our Belimo website and you'll find it all.
Okay, next question. Can the IP products support both Modbus RTU and Mod RTU and Mod TCP communication?
The IP actuators are Modbus TCP only, and the dash mod actuators are Modbus RTU only. And then both of those products have their BACnet counterparts as well. But so basically you could segment those two products. The mod line covers RS-45, which is MSTP and Modbus RTU, and the IP line covers BACnet IP and Modbus TCP.
Okay. Are any of your IP solutions PoE?
We do not have a released PoE product at this point in time.
Getting a lot of questions. On one of the slides, there was a bus connecting actuators. Sorry, my apologies. On one of the slides, there was a bus connecting actuator, sensors, and two rectangle devices. What were the rectangle devices representing?
Those were VFDs. So variable speed drives, variable frequency drives. So a typical built-up air handler would have valves, dampers, sensors, and variable speed drives to control the fan speeds. And most VFDs today have BACnet MSTP communication built into them.
Okay, next question. Since each actuator has an internal web client, does each actuator have to be logged into separately to configure?
Yes.
Okay, I have time for one last question. As I said, if we don't get to all your questions or comments today, rest assured we will reach out to you individually and get you a provided answer. So the last question is, what happens to a BACnet controlled actuator in the event of a loss of communication?
So in all of our products that are MSTP based, we have BACnet MSTP based. We have a feature called a bus watchdog, and that basically means the actuator is watching for writes to it to tell it what position to go to. And you can turn that feature on, and you can give it a setting between a minute and 60 minutes. And what happens is if it doesn't see a command in that amount of time or with that kind of frequency, it'll go to a bus fail-safe position, and that fail-safe position is configurable as well.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar, Smart Connected Belimo Devices, Do More and See More with your BAS. And thank you so much, Tom Denzer, for that excellent presentation.
Thanks, Michaela, and thanks everyone for watching.
Great, and we all look forward to having you participate in future webinars, and the next webinar will take place May 15th, 2019 at 1 p.m. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.